And I'll read some journal tonight, starting December 25th, 88. I didn't spend much time identifying the people that I mentioned. Some have real names, some are made up, some are just initials. There are several even who have the same name, same first name. But my interest in writing about them was in what they said or what they did. December 25th, 1988, 11:05 p.m. Christmas Day visit with Raoul. Pre-Christmas Day afternoon visit with Olivier and Raoul. 5 a.m. Christmas Mass at St. Nicholas Church. Dimitri Y. Invitation to Christmas noon dinner. But I ate at home. Katina bringing dinner. Yanni sending a beer. And Evangelia knocked on the door in the morning to hand me a plate of homemade pastries. Dimitri Y. had given me a box of pastries and a Christmas candle, along with mail from the post box yesterday. A Saturday favor. Funny program on BBC. Dame Edna, don't know her last name, billed as an Australian megastar, picking her 8 favorite records to take on a desert island. On a later program, Good Ellington, Harlem Air Shaft, with Clark Terry, and a good Clark Terry record, Mr. Mumbles, What Did You Say? Raoul talks about centers, heart center, and movement, spiritual movement, about the present and releasing the past, about being outgoing and accepting. Olivier talks about the present too, and about ego and non-ego, the self and the non-self. Raoul says the self comes to embrace the non-self. Théophane, another pre-Christmas visitor from Alsace, is a newly baptized Orthodox. He's a poet, frequent visitor to Mount Athos, first time in Patmos. He says it's good for poets to talk, specifically, with poets, and not always just with novelists and writers in other forms. Olivier writes a journal and sits zazen, or in some Buddhist key way. Theophan may start writing a journal. Raoul doesn't want to. He likes to draw in a sketchbook and do leg stretches on a dance bar. He would garden, too, if he could. All three are winter visitors to the island, and all three, quite consciously and articulately, are on a spiritual quest. December 26th. Fine, clear, windy day. White clouds and blue sky. Green grass on hills. Whole island looks more alive, more itself, and more a landmass than sea's background, than in summer. Good walk at waterfront, before and after lunch. Before, sit in guarantee on upended fish crates with Yorgo of the Yenya fishing family, and Evgenio of the Manoli freight boat family, while Yorgo, sitting on a fish crate, too, mended his nets. He'd talked earlier with Theologo, another winter fisherman who works on cargo ships in summer, and their talk was all fish business. How many and what kinds they'd caught, and how, where, and for how much they'd sold them. Peaceful and entertaining for them both, and at least, incidentally, informative. With me, Yorgo talks about the weather. Is it cold at my house? No, I have wooden floors. Not cold at his either. The floors are tile, but he has good rugs. Sleeps under just one cover, and without pajamas, wearing only his shorts. With Evgenio, young and unmarried, like Yorgo, he talks about the weather too, and the number of blankets. Then about what good weather it is to take your girl for a ride on a motorcycle. It seems windy to me. Then Evgenio says, it would be good on a day like this to be in Crete, or Rhodes, or Mytilene, big islands, and ride all around. He has Mytilene in mind, because he's just bought a house there. Big, beautiful one, he says, overlooking the bay of Hira and near the shipyard. He heard about it through a friend there and got it for what? 20 million drachmas? $200,000. And he's very pleased with it. All the comforts. For a man who spends most of his nights and days on a brick-loaded kaiki, and the fine view from its hillside windows and balcony onto the sea. Olivier lived in Taiwan for a while with a 91-year-old Chinese wise man and his somewhat younger fourth wife. The man had had no children, but Olivier refers to him as my Chinese grandfather. When I ask O about him, I ask about Grandpa. G, or Grandpa, used to do Tai Chi every morning, a sight O found inspiring. He regularly slept and woke in 4-hour cycles. O says, these are the natural cycles of the rise and fall of human energy. O studied engineering, so has a trained interest in energy. O says Grandpa did all things slowly and well, Tai Chi naturally included. One of Raoul's key words, discernment. O says that speaking in the Japanese language almost guarantees by its syntax that one will speak logically, and that this syntax also helps greatly in the composition of haiku. Evenings in China with Grandpa's wife and other friends might be spent in the composition and reading of tankas and haiku on a friendly but competitive basis. At the end of the evening, a guest of honor, professor or literary expert, rates the verses of the others by points. Grandpa's wife won second place one evening for her haiku and was pleased. Her haiku had said in 17 well-chosen syllables, I wake and see that it is 5 o'clock, and I prepare to go and join my group to do morning Tai Chi exercises in the park. Then I see the sun smiling broadly. It's 5 in the evening. I had had a long siesta. Neo-Confucianist writers in the 11th century talk about rights, R-I-T-E-S, and righteousness, as opposed to what they call Buddhist fantasies. What Albert liked, and perhaps would always like, was the tension between any two such views. Half in a dream and under a circus tent, this dialogue. Customer, what's this? It's clear water-like fluid in a glass-covered bowl. The salesman says, human medicine. The customer says, what's it good for? The salesman, with a slight smile, our pockets. Keep saying the same few little things over and over, and if they need fixing, fix. Concern about local friend D.G., whose leg may be hurt too much for him to get down off the hill he lives on, even with the help of his crude shepherd's cane, to shop for food. Path too narrow and wet after last night's rain for me to get up and see him. His son, who lives nearer town, may stop by and see him, but that's not sure. Jed Williams, C.K.'s son, who's 15 years old, sent me a book today from their home in Paris. Tolkien's The Silmarillion, a posthumous volume, edited by Tolkien's son, and 2 book reviews that he, Jed, had written of 2 other Tolkien books, and best wishes for the new year. I hadn't read Tolkien at all when he was first published, but on Jed's recommendation, we'll try him now. Raoul judged I had given up on the breathing exercise he showed me. My voice wasn't coming from the heels, as it's supposed to when you do them, but I have been doing the exercise, and will continue to. I'm happy when I can spend my time in reading, writing, walking, swimming in summer, and other not too strenuous gymnastics. Meditation comes into it too, and even in the smallest community, there are people to visit from time to time, and others who stop in to see you. Have now read the first 4 pages of The Music of Ainur by Tolkien, and like them. D.G. made it to town without Shepherd's Crook, but his leg hurts again. I asked him how he'd make it back up the hill. He said, on all fours, if I have to. He'll visit his father, gravely ill, in another part of town. Then, several hours after dark, start for home. A violin string who wanted to give forth the world's most beautiful sound did all she could to keep herself in fine playing form with that one thought in mind. The reality of reality. The dreamlike quality of dreams. The dreamlike nature of reality. The real nature of dreams. More rabbits, more whales. More rabbits, more whales. Less robots, more rabbits. Less robots, more whales. Incremental advances. This moment and the next. Make the next thought good. Delta Theta's mother-in-law, who's at least 95 years old, fell out of her bed the other night, picked herself up, and climbed back in again. Delta's wife then heard her say to herself, "What's the matter? Have you lost your mind?" This is a maxim of La Rochefoucauld. Absence, like the wind, blows out little candles, but fans big fires. Try to talk like everyone else. Try not to. Try to talk like yourself. Don't try. Many things needed to be put in place, but only a few discarded. The dompteur tells me it's essential to feed the lions at regular times. Above the blue door, light fondles white wall. One wind, two winds, three winds, 4, 5 winds blowing outside my window, arguing and agreeing. Rather have him with all his faults than most with all their virtues. Peaceful is the morning in the shrine garden. I hope that world conditions will also be peaceful. That's a poem written at least 40 years ago by the late Emperor Hirohito. Don't live, train. Don't spend, save. All way better than halfway. Halfway better than none. That evolution might be moving towards something like a string quartet. A. What he wanted was attention. B. Why did he want attention? A. So he could call the class to order. B. Why did he want to call the class to order? A. So he could give them a message they'd be glad to hear. B. What was the message they'd be glad to hear? A. That they were saved, that everything would henceforth be all right. When are you coming to see me? Says D.G., who lives up in the hills. Maybe on Sunday morning, I say. Come soon, he says. The bouzouki is getting rusty. It's a semi-imaginary bouzouki, a kind of paddle with wooden handle and papier-mâché sounding board. No strings. He pretends to play it, comically, when I'm there, to entertain himself and me. Journal starts in January, on the 25th of January. This entry may come a little later. My friend Dmitri, who works at the post office, took me for a ride in his car this afternoon to a part of the island I'd never seen before, and to visit the outside of a little church called the Cross. It was like going to another world, a whole new landscape, beautiful in the afternoon light. As we rode, he talked about people and families he knew on the island, ones he'd grown up with or was related to by birth or through marriage, or those he knew mainly through years of bringing them the mail. He seemed genuinely to love and appreciate them, all as parts of his world, to accept them all, both consciously and unconsciously, with affection and understanding and humor. As a growing child accepts the members of his family, his brothers and sisters, his parents, aunts, uncles, and cousins as familiar companions, essential components of his life. It's because I've psychologized them all, he said, when I asked him how this came to be. I've gotten to know them all from the inside. He said, if you don't do that, you're lost. You lose the whole value of a life here. If you don't make an effort to know the people who live here, to know them from the inside, you're blind to the life of the island, and you don't have a life of your own. He said this quite calmly and with pleasure. You'd never want to leave here, would you? I asked. Oh no, not I, said Dmitri. My life is here. He said some people who grow up here but don't have this kind of contact with the island, imagine they'll find it somewhere else. They'll go to Australia. They'll go to Gibraltar. I can't remember what other places he named. But if they didn't find it here and go there after they've grown up, it's too late. They won't find it there either, was what he implied. I remembered a story I'd heard from Olivier, whose landlady, Calliope, had been invited by her son in America to come and visit him there. She'd fly, and of course, he'd pay the fare. But she had to refuse. I couldn't leave my goat alone here, she said. Or if I went, I'd have to take her with me. Dmitri laughed and understood it. In big towns in Europe, I said, you hardly get a feeling like that about your neighbors. You know them mainly as people you ride to work with on a bus. I know, he said. It's like the difference between having a big farm with lots of sheep and cattle, or having a little one with just a few sheep or goats. You know them all, with their individual traits. You give them names, and you enjoy them. January 27th, 1989. I sit with Yorgo, Barbandoni, and Yanni, while Yorgo mends nets. Yorgo says to sit on a pile of nets out of the wind for a moment's rest. He and Barbandoni talk about fishing. Yorgo cuts away at the nets and mends while talking. Mikali, the Samiotis, who runs the Cafe Neon, comes by with a small, thin, sensitive dog, Nicola's dog, who loves Mikali now and follows him everywhere. Mikali sits on a fish crate in the sun. Against the white wall of the pier's new waiting room, the dog sits, or sometimes paces, beside him, waiting to see what Mikali's next move will be. Four men sit in the sun now. Four and a dog, Mikali and two others, are seated on fish crates. The fourth, short but well-knit Panago, reclines on the tiles of the terrace like an ancient at a feast. They all know their lines for a sunlit conversation. Their forms melt in to each other like figures in a frieze. Each one is relaxed, and the group as a whole has visual plasticity. Each one makes room for the others in the sphere of his being. And the conversation is meant to bind, not separate. To bind, but not bind tightly. To hold the group in harmonious suspension. Sun moves their shadows, but slightly, on the wall. I run into Delta G as he comes out of the Cafe Neon on the square. Whenever he sees me, he says, "Na," an exclamation of surprise. He tells me to come up to see him on Sunday morning at his farmhouse on the hill. He'll be listening to the liturgy then, on the radio, while he washes last night's dishes in a plastic basin on his front terrace, with water drawn up in a bucket from the well. Or hangs his laundry, washed, outside, too, on a line. The one thing life does here, at every level, is continue. There's never a moment that feels like a stop. Every activity folds into another. Everyone pushes, though often quite gently pushes, the whole mass along. And everyone understands that it all must go on. No one ever attempts to bring the movement, the moment, to a standstill. And everyone moves with the tide. Hardly anyone even thinks of moving against it, even though each one moves in his own way. One man is outspoken, another more prudent, but each will find a way of saying what he will. February 9th. I walked near the waterfront tonight, just as the Athens boat stopped by on its way to Rhodes. As it backed into the dock, I headed for home, passing a small group of Greek visitors and a local baggage handler near the dockside kiosk. One of the visitors, a woman, recognized me as I passed and said aloud to the baggage handler, "Is that old boy still here?" The local man said, "He's here. He lives with us." February 10th. Sitting with 3 or 4 fishermen and a fruit peddler on his off hour. The fishermen sit on crates in the sun, grouped around one, seated on burlap or plastic sack, on the pier, mending his nets. Not his. He's retired, and on a very small pension now. About $100 a month. But his sons. Another fisherman asks if his work, he mends his son's nets constantly, is being appreciated. He suggests he could do better by mending someone else's nets and being paid for the work. The father says little, just listens. The talk now turns to the fisherman who asked the question. His own youngest son, in his early teens, sits beside him on a crate. He and his sons work well together, says the fisherman, and the teenage son agrees. The father has worked for years on cargo ships in summer and comes home to fish in winter. He's raised a family of 4 or 5 sons. They work too in summer and some in winter at the local cafes or in tourist shops, and together they helped buy a fishing boat for their father. They all spoke excitedly, like characters in a drama. They shared a point of view in all they spoke of, but each one had his own few words to contribute. There's one way of life that they all understand, and their work is to keep it moving forward. What's the essence of their way of life? Survival as independent fishermen and families. The other jobs they do feed into that. Sometimes silent, sometimes speak, sometimes silent, sometimes sing. None of us will be here then, said Yorgo. And all the wonder of nature, hills, the sea, the islands, will be gone for us. Has anyone ever written us a letter from way out there? Delta Theta's mother-in-law, who's 95 plus and fast losing strength, shouted for help last night in her delirium. She'll have the police breaking in on us, said her daughter. I stopped by to see friend Delta Theta and his family today, just after their noon meal. They were gathered in the living room, Delta and his wife, and their new daughter-in-law, sitting on a daybed, Calliope, the next-door neighbor, beside them, on a straight-back chair, watching a television drama, a serialized episode in English with Greek subtitles. The Bold and the Brave. They were held by it, a perfect Greek audience, left over from the old days, rapt with interest, telling each other, sotto voce, what each of the characters was thinking and why. Mikali, the Samiotis, who runs the Cafe Neon nearest the port, and whose wife died several years ago, stays at home after lunch every day to watch it, too. February 14th. An old goat herd sitting on a gravelly hill path this afternoon, watching his goats, told me a story about a neighbor of his, a still older farmer, and his grandson, to illustrate what's happening with the younger generation. The old farmer owned 2 mules, goats too, and a fair amount of land, but had fallen ill after the death of his wife, and could not keep up with his chores. He had saved 2 burlap sacks of manure from his mules, and wanted to spread them on one of his fields on the hillside as fertilizer. But illness obliged him to ask his grandson to load up the mules and carry the bags to the field. He paid the boy 500 drachmas to do the job well. The next day, the old farmer came out to the stable and was satisfied to see that the sacks of manure were gone. He assumed the boy had taken them up to the family's field in the hills. It was several days later, and only by chance, that he learned what had actually happened. The boy had loaded up the mules all right, then walked them off to the other side of town and sold the sacks of farmer's gold, the valuable manure, to another farmer, who paid the boy 1,000 drachmas a sack. That way, the goatherd told me, he made 2,500 drachms on the deal. Delta Gamma, the houseman at the theological school, halfway up the hill to Hora, has not been to work for 3 days. The double doors of his one-room cement block house on the hill of Castelli are wide open to the winter air and he's lying on his white, iron-posted bed, wrapped in blankets and a quilt, like a pupa in its cocoon. Above the pillow, at the head of the bed, his nose and one eye are visible. He sees me and says, "Ah," and then adds, "Grippe," the grip. "How long have you had it?" I asked. "3 days, since Sunday." "What do you feel?" "Just cold," he said. "I'm freezing. I was up for a while this morning, but I couldn't stand it, so I'm back in bed. This grip is the plague. I'll die." "Don't die," I said. "I haven't fed the animals for 3 days either," he said. "The mules and the goats. I can't get down to where they are. If you see my son in town, tell him come up to see me, and tell him to feed the goats." I did see his son as I came down the hill and told him. February 19th. Sat in the sun and out of the wind with the same crowd of fishermen today, while one, Theologo, told us all the story of his life, from fisherman to able-bodied seaman on a cargo ship, and back to fisherman. He told us his starting salaries on the ships and indicated his ending ones. All his friends listened seriously and almost silently to his account before beginning narrations of their own. Theologo didn't waste a word or hesitate over his choice of them either. Yanni, his young son, came along and sat beside him as he reached the middle of his story, and as he reached the end of it, asked him to explain in detail what overtime meant, an Anglicism he had heard but never quite understood. Could you refuse to work overtime? You could, but you wouldn't, Theologo implied. Who assigns the work to you? The captain? Asked Yanni. No, the Lustromus, said Theologo. The deck officer. The days are sunny, windy, and for Patmos, cold. Last week there was rain, but just for one night. Kyria Angeliki, the wife of Pandalis Bahas, who owns the Rex Hotel, said the drought is a real worry. If it doesn't rain on roads or coasts, at least, we'll have no drinking water for the summer, and that would be a disaster for the tour business. We have 40 hotels here now, she said, not one or two, and others still being built. And if they have no water, our summer supply of water is usually brought by a weekly boat from coasts and roads where there are natural springs and usually, in winter, abundant rain. But this year, for over a month and a half, there's been but one night's rainfall on the islands. Delta Gamma, making his way through the square yesterday, told me again to come up and see him at his house on the hill today, but not in the morning. He'd be away then at a convent on the other side of the island to attend a memorial service for his mother, who died last year. Come up after 4 in the afternoon, he said. I'll be at the house by then. Now from an outdoor notebook starting January 17th. He was thinking now about the man who had told him that if he just kept writing down what he was thinking, his problems would all go away. As though you were trying, as though you were trying to get a good note from the string. Trying, as though you were trying to bring a good note from the string. To pluck a good note from the string. Constant amelioration of tone. As though it were on its way to becoming a fuller and brighter moment. Regard it as though it were about to become each better than the last. Better than perfect is ever toward good. Ever in process of perfection. Not satisfaction, not perfection. A constant moving toward the good. Toward best possible good. Highest and most rarefied ever higher, ever more rarefied, best way to improve it enjoy it. Savor it. Improve and enjoy. Enjoy and improve. A record of happy or a very slightly less than felicitous landings. big-boned, well-fleshed, clean-featured. Even the chaotic calls of the night are more musical in Bologna. Don't just reject. Improve. When does it make sense to ask if a thing makes sense? When it doesn't. What is a good artist good at? Few words, sharp characterization. Society is the name of their God. We speak of society, but do we have one? Or are we only moving toward having one? If we are moving toward having one, what should it be? National, global, or universal? How can we move toward being part of a universal society. What do we require of that society? What does it require of us? How to be a citizen. Denizens and citizens. Citizens and denizens. A city of the mind. He who acquires the spirit of peace will save thousands of souls. Thousands of souls. He who acquires the spirit of peace will save thousands of souls around him. Millicent Murdoch's Macrobiotic Mouse Farm. Learn to teach. Teach to learn. Old train, last station. Few hot thoughts need to be worked up on a better computer than mine. We're related in this one way, that each of us is alive today. Rule to be observed on waking. Rule to be observed in dreams. Rule to be observed on waking. Rule to be observed in dreams. Loyal in dream. Loyal on waking. Loyal on waking. loyal in dream. Trust self, others trust you. Don't trust self. Nobody trust you. Trust others. They trust you. If life were such an easy thing to get a grip on, we'd all have a grip by now. What's the most loving thing I could do at this particular moment? Relax. If it doesn't interfere, it may contribute to contemplation. Petals. Last come. First go. Forgive, but don't forget. Forget, but don't forgive. Forgive, 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 forgive. Forget, forgive. Try to be invisible. Try not to be heard. You'll still be visible. You'll still be heard. If this were the only other living creature in the world, would I not be gentle with it? All the world that has ever been is part of me, dormant in me, and may be awakened. Call whom I will, he comes. Go where I will, I'm there. The light toward which I move is here, inside me. Say what you mean. Mean what you say. Don't say what you don't. And don't pretend to say what can't be said, or what you can't yet say. If you're planning a good surprise, fool the one you're surprising a little, but not yourself. Trying to acquire the spirit of peace, the spirit of peace. Trying to acquire the spirit of peace, The question had tumbled from a patch of blue sky, populated by angels. One crippling crack, and it was over. Dry, the dry, dry, the dry, the dry stick, the green stick, the dry stick, the green stick, the green stick, the green stick, the dry, wind speaks calmly. Night speaks calmly. Wind speaks calmly. Night speaks calmly. Sky, not alarmed. Sky, not alarmed. Wind, calmly. Night, calmly. Sky, not alarmed. Not alarmed. In and out of wind song, weaving, voice of old priest. Weaving, wind, bonging, church bell, bonging, church bell, weaving, wind. Wind song, wind song, plain song, plain song, plain song, plain song, wind song, wind song, the dark earth, the dark earth, the night sky, the night sky, the dark earth, the dark earth, the night sky, the bright star, the bright star, the dark earth, the dark earth, the bright star, the bright star. The night sky. Is the wind awake? Is the wind asleep? Is the wind awake? Is the wind asleep? Does he sing when he wakes? Does he sing when he sleeps? Wind is singing. The wind is singing. Whether he watches or whether he sleeps. Wind, not make, just whoosh, whoosh sound. Wind, make, whistle sound. Two. Night throws a handful of rain at the window. The measured conversation of the rain. Rain is falling. The way she likes to. Gently. Kamikaze, raindrop, crash, to field. Girls in chorus. Rain approaching. News from the court. The whisper of ladies. Buddhist choir. The deep-voiced rain. Begins again. The rain, the rain, the rain begins again, again. Again, 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 again. The rain, the rain, the rain, bone against bone, flesh against flesh, heart against heart, mind against mind, mind against mind, heart against heart, flesh against flesh, bone against bone. Room speaks. Clock speaks. Room speaks. Clock speaks. speaks, room speaks, clock speaks, clock speaks, black ink, black ink, white fire, three boys running blindfold on rim of a high turning wheel. In dreamland, the castle. In dreamland, the cave. The ways of water open before me. The ways of water close behind me. The river tried to remember her youth in the mountains. The earth, the sea, the sea, the earth, the sea, the sea, the sky, the sky, the sky, the sky, the earth, the earth, the sea, in his dreams, there were fishes. When he woke, there were trees. In his dreams, there were bears. When he woke, there were windows. When he woke, there were bears. When he slept, there were windows. When he woke, there were fishes. When he slept, there were trees.